All right, welcome to our webinar. We are waiting on a couple of people to join, so please hang tight. We'll start shortly.
Where are the others?
I think we just went on mute and waiting for a colleague to join. Okay, I think we'll get started and then we'll do the Materials Hub presentation update as we get an opportunity. I don't want folks to wait. So, welcome to our webinar. In fact, this is our second option running. We had an excellent webinar in the morning, which was more for the Eastern time zone. So, I think from several locations, colleagues joined, an excellent participation, lots of questions, comments came through. And I can see that Mona is on the call now. So I will let her do the welcome and introduction, and then we will start from with our expert panel also.
Thanks, Anil. And just a quick technical point, if you're able to share with Stacy her personal link, so she's able to join us. Thank you.
Stacy has joined, yes.
All right, great. Yeah, so thanks everybody for joining. I'm just gonna open the presentation on my screen, and here we go. All right, so thank you so much for joining. This is the first webinar, the second iteration of the first webinar today in our series in the Global ABC Materials Hub. And this work that we're doing today is the GlobalABC Materials Hub is a collaboration between the Life Cycle Initiative, the One Planet Network, and the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, all of whom are hosted by UNEP, along with the Green Building Council Costa Rica. So just a quick update or introduction, because this was open to members and non-members of the Global Alliance. So the Global Alliance was founded at COP21 and is hosted by UNEP, and there's about almost 340 members right now, and about 42 that come from countries, and then the rest come from all over the value chain, be it public agencies, private sector, civil society, cities, and networks. The Global ABC works towards a common vision for a zero emission, efficient, and resilient buildings and construction sector. And we work on that through 4 different venues or avenues. First is we work on the advocacy and catalyzing people to action and stakeholders to action. Then we work on setting targets and tracking progress. We also work with government, national and subnational level, and setting their priorities. And then finally, we support the private sector on reaching a lot of these priorities, setting these priorities, and the strategies towards implementing them. And the materials hub, you may ask, why is there a hub focused on materials? And that is because materials, as we all know, the building sector overall contributes about a third of the emissions, of the global emissions, and about 10% is caused by building materials. And so being in the sector already that contributes the largest to emissions, the materials play quite a key role in the level of emissions that are also produced. And there is an opportunity, there's a big opportunity because only half of the buildings that will be standing in 2060 have been built, which means that the other half are the ones that we are designing today. And we have the opportunity to make these changes today. So in GlobalABC, we work on considering embodied carbon in these building decisions, and we look at that through an avoid, shift, improve framework. Avoid focusing more on reducing the construction work that we do, so either building with fewer materials or re-envisioning the use of buildings and rehabilitating these buildings so that we don't need to construct new buildings. We'll also look at shifting to alternative building materials. And then finally, we look at improving and decarbonizing current conventional materials. So with that in mind, the mission of the Materials Hub is really about knowledge generation, dissemination, and implementation to apply this avoid, shift, improve framework. And we were brought here originally with the climate intention to reduce emissions, but we're now looking even beyond that at how we are engaging with people. So looking at healthy, sustainable net zero buildings, as well as the socioeconomic and biodiversity considerations, such as job creation and business opportunities, and of course, preserving the integrity of biodiversity. And the objectives of the hub run around the aims of the Global ABC, where we strive to shape a common vision for the stakeholders, work on advocacy and synergy, and then develop and pilot different tools that enable different actors to overcome these barriers, as well as linking to global agendas such as the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. And finally, we facilitate the exchange of best practices and innovative ideas, looking at the education aspect. So the Materials Hub has three working groups, one focused on circular built environment, another focused on whole life cycle policy coalition, and the last focused on bio-based materials. And you can see in this slide the co-leads for each of these working groups. And if you want to join the Materials Hub, this is a QR code. And some of the ongoing activities that we have right now, the first one is this webinar that you're already in. So grateful to have you with us today. And then the other two activities that we wanted to bring to your attention is the opportunity to submit resources to the 10 whole life cycle recommendations for the buildings breakthrough, among which there is a focus on data, there's a focus on policy making, and a focus on knowledge exchange, as well as circularity at the building level. So please check us out on the Global ABC website, as well as submit your resources and your case studies, as we'd love to showcase these. And then there's also the compendium on bio-based materials, which aims to bring together practitioners from all over the world who work on these bio and earth-based materials as substitutes that we can apply in the building sector. So please do share with us your contributions. Sorry, I'm gonna skip this slide. I'm just going to stop here looking at the time. And so with this, I'm going to hand over to Anil to talk about the promoting a data ecosystem for near zero emission and resilient built environment. I'm glad to have all the different participants with us today, as well as the panel. So Anil, thank you so much for putting this together, and happy to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Mona. Really appreciate the setting up of this webinar, and want to, on behalf of RICS, would like to thank GlobalABC for making this happen. I'm going to now first introduce our expert panel, who was very kindly given us their time. And also, I'd like to thank the participants for joining. So before I share the context, the reason for this webinar, and a few things from RICS, I'd like to make some quick introductions. So let me begin by introducing Professor Wanderlei M. John, who's a professor at the Polytechnic School at the University of Sao Paulo. He's also a board member of Sustainable Construction, the Brazilian Council, and has done extensive amount of work in the area of creating industry-wide, nationwide databases and address this data issue in a significant fashion. Next expert on our panel, very well-known globally, a global leader, Stacey Smedley, who's the Executive Director of Building Transparency. Everyone, pretty much all of us, use EC3 and love the work that EC3 does in this space, providing free access to an excellent carbon calculator. So, and last but not least, our third panel member is Miranda Gardiner, who is the executive director of a very interesting organization called iMasons. Within that, she runs the Climate Accord. This is essentially a global gathering of folks involved in delivering our digital infrastructure, more specifically the data centers. And anyone today using AI tools can appreciate the importance of data centers in the world that we live in today. So with that, I'm going to jump into a quick overview of this webinar and some information that I would like to share from RICS. So let me share my present. No, that's not it. So I will share my slides, hopefully right this time. You all can see my slides now. So on slideshow mode. The webinar today is going to focus on the promotion of a data ecosystem for near zero emission and resilient built environment. My name is Anil Sahani. I'm head of sustainability for the RICS. I'm also the chair of ICMS Standard Setting Committee. And this is a joint effort between Global Alliance for Buildings Construction and RICS and all the other stakeholders offering this webinar. So a bit of a background about this webinar. We all recognize the fact that a robust data ecosystem is important for achieving the net zero emissions and resilient building mission that has come to us through the Buildings Breakthrough process. The primary challenge that the sector right now faces a limited availability of an open shared data ecosystem at a global scale, which hinders accurate assessments that feed into the mission of net zero emission and resilient buildings. There is also limited availability of locally relevant secondary data, which is a barrier to wider adoption, especially in some regions and some parts of the world where assessors who would like to perform comprehensive, consistent assessments face this issue of limited availability of carbon factors, waste factors, transportation factors, other carbon conversion factors. So that also is something very important as a context to this webinar. But there are lots of global regional initiatives that you're going to hear today also, some run by RICS as well, that are pushing the boundaries and promoting interoperability and data sharing. So leveraging these initiatives can lead to the call for connected, open, transparent data ecosystem supporting the mission of GlobalABC Materials Hub. So today we would like to address and start the conversation on the importance of data in achieving NZERB, highlight the importance of both primary and secondary data in assessments, describe strategies to promote the availability of good quality secondary data, especially in the Global South, share best practices for consistently measuring primary data, talk about the challenges of creating a data ecosystem, and then connect with ongoing collaborations and industry-wide initiatives that help improve the quality of the underlying data. And then highlight the importance of sharing your results of your assessments also, because that's how you build up a database of benchmarks, targets, and limits, which is equally important. So eventually emphasize the role of quality data that come from data standards and schemas, which ensure consistency, accuracy, comparability, and interoperability. So RICS has been involved in the sustainability journey. We had developed our first edition of the Whole Life Carbon Assessment Professional Standard, first edition in 2017. And then last year, 2023, September, we launched our second edition of the WLCA standard. We have participated in COP, especially COP29, the Buildings Breakthrough Agenda process, and then followed by participation and at the Paris event, which was the Buildings and Climate Global Forum, where the Declaration de Chaillot was made, in which a clear indication of the importance of environmental data necessary for effective decision-making came about. It was recognized by the signatories, I believe, between COP29 of roughly 28 countries to roughly 70 countries by the time Paris event took place. So it is very clear that to create decarbonization and resilient pathways, it is important to have access to good quality data so that decision makers can access the data. Within RICS, we have a broad sustainability strategy that sort of makes sure we connect it to the natural and built environment. We are currently running our strategy off of 4 themes that are supported by 4 underlying cross-cutting levers. So our themes are broad-based on decarbonization, biodiversity, circularity, and resilience. Yesterday, RICS president launched the Circularity Do Tank pledge in our London headquarters, and that's an initiative that is going to continue into the future. Supporting these 4 themes are the levers of standardizing metrics for the measurement, helping influence decision makers, providing guidance, training, and support to our 145,000 members globally, and then more importantly, relevant to this session, leveraging data and technology. Within the decarbonization pillar or theme, we are contributing to the creation of a methodology for measuring whole life carbon through our Whole Life Carbon Assessment second edition. We are providing a schema through a global coalition of about 50 professional bodies on how to report the results of assessments using an agreed taxonomy that includes cost and carbon reporting through ICMS third edition. We are also helping the data ecosystem by creating the built environment carbon database that has lots of information needed for assessments. So in the context of today's webinar, here are my brief views. The data ecosystem that we are talking about today, in my view, consists of 3 buckets. The first bucket is directed towards primary data, data that is directly estimated and measured from your project or asset for which you are doing the assessment. Here, we should provide best practices and guidelines to assessors, especially, for example, quantity surveyors and cost managers getting involved in the estimation of bill of materials, transport factors or transport numbers, waste factors, energy models, and so on. We would like to promote a model-based approach so that primary data is extracted from building information models. The second bucket is the secondary data. This is also called the background data for assessment. These are your national carbon factors, carbon conversion factors, perhaps EPDs, PCRs, and other sources of information such as energy grid decarbonization factors, material decarbonization factors. Extremely crucial. These are industry-wide, generally at a national or regional scale, and assessors dip into this to do the assessment. So it's a very important bucket within the data ecosystem. Third, the last one is access to limits, budgets, and performance metrics. These are generally developed using top-down and bottom-up approaches. A very good example of something that RICS is involved in, and last Tuesday, this was released in the UK, called the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard, in which buildings of various typologies can now rely on voluntary limits and budgets by building typology. So that's the ecosystem that we are talking about today. But then there are challenges. The annual RICS sustainability report highlights that our respondents, we get roughly about 4,000 to 6,000 responses every year for our sustainability report. The number one blocker in this domain is the lack of established standards, tools, databases, benchmarks, and guidance. So you can clearly see the importance of data, and provisioning of data will help improve the ecosystem. Our standard, the WLCA second edition, also highlights the importance of cost and carbon data as the project and asset evolves. You have at the concept stage, perhaps asset level benchmarks, but as the design evolves, construction begins, and we come close to practical completion and beyond, your energy models get replaced by metered data, your bill of materials get changed by as-built quantities, as-built product information, and the actual EPDs for those product systems and materials. So it is a very similar evolution to the cost workflows, where you initially have high-level benchmarks, but as you go into the project life cycle, you have detailed bottom-up information that's needed. We already have very strong global ecosystems. So, for example, EPDs can be now digitally produced. Open EPD, a format produced by Building Transparency, openly available and shared, can be further supported through this governance and standards ecosystem, where you have interconnected data dictionaries through ISO 23386. You have data templates or product data templates from 23387, and guidance on 22057 and how to use EPDs within a BIM kind of framework, all supported by the ISO 19650 series of BIM standards. And then you have your information classification standards, the ISO 12006 series of standards also. Within RICS, currently in the UK context, we have an open, freely available to the public built environment carbon database, which is our way of sharing the information and the data that we have. This database has two libraries. We have a product library and an asset level library, which can be used by assessors to not only receive inputs, but we are also requesting folks using BECD to report back their assessments so that we can, on an ongoing basis, continue to improve the BECD benchmarks and also continually enhance the product library. So that's pretty much what I wanted to share. Hopefully that this help provide some context. If you need to get more information about our standards and other user guides and piece of information, you can scan this QR code to go to our WLCA hub. And if you have any questions, you can send an email to standards@rics.org. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And I now request Stacy to share her opening statement. I know you have some slides that you would like to share.
Just get it into slideshow mode. Great. So thanks, everyone. It's so great to be here with this panel this morning, talking about one of my favorite things and something that building transparency is focused on. Particularly, but just a little bit of background on building transparency. If you don't know us, we are a US-based 501c3 nonprofit with a mission of providing the free open access data and tools needed to really decarbonize the built environment in the construction sector. And we do that with two tools that we offer. Anil mentioned our embodied carbon and construction calculator, EC3, which is a free open access tool and database of environmental product declarations. And then we also were gifted Tally LCA, which is a whole building life cycle assessment tool based in Revit. So in our world and what we do, something that's particularly important to us, providing tools and data, is that we look at the data and we ensure that we have what we need to support everyone. And I really like to put this into context just for 1 second. We support now about 55,000 users in over 78 countries with the data and tools that we offer in the embodied carbon world. And it's really obvious that whether you're an owner setting policies, a policymaker at a federal or a local government, architects, engineers, or contractors that must meet policies, or the manufacturers that are trying to comply, we need to have two different types of data to really service this work. We need generic material data sets that can be used to look at averages and benchmarks and fill gaps in specific data that we are not currently supporting or we don't have in certain regions. And then, of course, we need the product-specific data sets and the upstream data that allows us to actually realize and account for what we did. And I will share these slides. There's a lot of information on them. I know we have to go fast this morning. But really to just level set, this is all hands on deck. We all need this data for various purposes at various stages, and that data needs to be consistent. This is my attempt at really showing how uncertainty currently applies when we look at every step of the data process, starting with the upstream process data where we're getting unit process emission factors from databases like EcoInvent or GABI that then flow into LCA platforms that may have different ways of aggregating that data or leveraging different data sets as their underlying calculation factors that enable life cycle assessments that then push out databases of these generic material LCAs, and also then push into meeting product category rule requirements where those LCAs are verified into EPDs and into the databases that support that. So as we go up that process, currently the uncertainty does grow because there is lack of alignment and harmonization really at every step of that kind of calculation workflow. The one thing I will say, which I adamantly believe, and is kind of our ethos at building transparency, is we can't wait to address all of this uncertainty to act and to leverage the data as it currently exists. We just need to make sure that we are being transparent about the fact that uncertainty exists and work to address it as an ecosystem and a community. The two types of data that we are supporting where we are trying to both daylight uncertainty and address it are in the EC3 tool. We have a database of over 180,000 digitally available environmental product declarations that we now pull in from every program operator in the world and every database that we can then go query to bring it into one format in one place. And so again, in our tool, this is how you could access it to use it in a free tool, but we have over I think we have almost 10 platforms now, including Materials 2050, Tangible, Cove Tool, Sustainable Minds, Ecomedes, that are now all leveraging our database that's been standardized to provide product-specific information in their platforms. And that's very important to us. The second is an initiative that we announced in February in Paris this year. And we are just getting ready to release the first data sets out of this project. It's called the Open Data for Climate Initiative. It's led by Building Transparency, managed by us, but in partnership with Eco Platform in Europe as our verification layer, and supported by Loudest Foundation, ClimateWorks, Meta, and Ramble Foundation. And it is a harmonized methodology for providing global life cycle assessment generic data sets that are regionalized and provide ranges so that everyone can really start from the same collection of generic data to set benchmarks and move into product-specific data downstream. So there'll be more announcements on this as we publish this data. I'm just going to skip that one. It will actually look at a workflow like this, where the data will go into both our API format and database available for free, as well as become available in the Eco Platform Eco Portal database that then allows any tool and reporting entity downstream to use that for accounting and compliance. So we're very excited about the progress we've made there. And that's it, because I know we have to get to the next presentation and the Q&A.
Thank you, Stacy. That was excellent. Miranda, would you like to go next and share your slides, please?
Absolutely. I'm finding mute. Let me know. Can you all see this now? Perfect.
Yes.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. Stacy, thanks for going first. Always good to follow such a wonderful leader and such a wonderful presentation. As I mentioned, I'm Miranda Gardner. I'm the executive director of the iMasons Climate Accord. And as Anil alluded to, this is a nonprofit focused in on carbon reductions in digital infrastructure, so primarily data centers. And to give some context on it, the foundation of it started to evolve in about 2021. We launched in April of 2022, but really looking at the responsibility that this sector, especially tech overall, has when it comes to climate change issues. At that time, there was over 7 million square feet of data centers. As you all know, with the launch of generative AI last fall, that has gone through the roof. We are growing exponentially. If anyone on this call is in an architecture engineering practice, I'm sure you now either have a data center practice or mission critical, or again, are staffing up for that because this is quite the growth market. You can also see the kind of power capacity, and the number that I always like to look at too is that 2.4% of global electricity. For reference, that is the same electricity small countries use, or large countries even. I've looked at the numbers. Germany uses around that same amount of energy, global electricity. Canada, Brazil. So this is a big number that we're working with. And again, these are all pre-generative AI. The foundation of the ICA came about thanks to our advisory council from the iMasons. The Infrastructure Masons as a whole is a decade-long nonprofit that's really focused in on larger issues than just sustainability, just carbon reductions. They look at things like inclusion. They look at how many women are in the workforce, veterans, young professionals, you name it. They also look at innovation, education. We have a whole platform on how to get folks involved and engaged with what data centers are doing. So this was an initiative launched by that advisory council. These were the leaders of that advisory council there. Some of you may recognize a few of them. That's Christian Bellotti, formerly of Microsoft, right there in the middle. Right behind him is Joe Cava, still at Google, et cetera, et cetera. They are all still involved. So my hyperscaler companies really drive the initiatives of the Climate Accord, AWS, Google, Meta, Microsoft, as well as over 270 companies now too, spanning the range of delivery and services that are involved when it comes to this sector. Their only goal, or the primary goal of this, is that we are in collaboration to battle climate change. As Stacy said too, transparency, collaboration, these are the key principles of the Climate Accord. Here's kind of that in short form. 8 trillion in market cap, so a lot of buying power. Our key areas are really in now on embodied carbon, so aligned with this webinar today, talking about things like EPDs, whether it's materials or equipment, what's going on in power and how we get it there and how we successfully generate it from renewable sources. And of course, that goal of net zero carbon for digital infrastructure. Quick summary of who leadership is. I'm the only full-time employee of the Climate Accord, but luckily for me, all these experts get involved as working group chairs, as my governing body, and then with them and the actual working groups, over 35% of the companies are represented in volunteer roles. So I have quite the bench of subject matter expertise, anything from liquid cooling to EPDs to small modular reactors when it comes to the nuclear discussion. So we really have a deep bench of support in terms of the work that we are doing so far. And here's that kind of deep bench in short form of who our partners are, who our movers are, and then who our larger companies are. 2 more slides quickly, and then I'm going to hand it off. Our core principles really focus around what I jokingly call carbon, 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 with an emphasis on the 3rd and 5th image that you see there, that collaborative piece, and then, of course, that transparency that Stacey alluded to. We talk very well about these things. We're really trying to make sure that this actually comes to fruition. This is the only way we're going to scale these solutions. It's the only way also we're going to resolve the issues that we have with scope 3. Of those companies noted in those images before, a lot of them will tell you 90% or more of their emissions right now that they are tracking are in that scope 3 area. We really need to work together to ensure that our vendors, our suppliers, those involved anywhere in that supply chain are tracking and looking at this accurately, and that we are open with our information and our data. 2 things that we're doing in that vein then too are when it comes to these key focus areas of material, equipment, and power. One of them is a project that we have the Open Compute Foundation working on a carbon disclosure label, and that really is to open up that kind of, again, lens of what is going on, how it's being calculated, what the actual numbers are right now. To us is not really the issue. We just need to see the data, see where we are as an industry to kind of baseline and get ahead of that. The other thing that will be coming in January of next year is a maturity model that addresses all 3 of these things, the core and shell, the MEP and IT of the systems, and then, of course, the source energy. It's looking at it so that you can kind of map against yourself, and then ultimately we can map the industry as to where we are, what needs additional improvements, where the ICA can be of value to support with education, with programming like today, and just really getting, further ahead of this, because as we know, climate change is here. We need to do quite a bit more in terms of all of our initiatives together to drive the change we want to see. So thank you very much. And I'm going to hand it back over to Anil and our next speaker.
Thanks, Miranda. I think you've taken the pretty difficult challenge of embodied carbon for MEP and IT equipment. We all know that that's something that's in data center space that's absolutely important, but pretty difficult task to get EPDs and other information for that kind of stuff. So last but not least, I'm going to invite Vanderlei to please share your slides and provide your opening statement. You may be on mute. If you're speaking, we can't hear.
Okay, now I think it's okay, right? Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. I'm going to give a perspective from developing country. Our focus is a low-cost, easy to learn, and fully digital embodied CO2 data system. My first thing that I would like to say is real primary data for real-world problems. I don't think we can optimize industry using secondary data. There's nothing coming from secondary data on industrial optimization. We need primary data. And from my point of view, it's sometimes you need secondary data, but you have to keep it a minimum. And you have to have primary data to minimize the environmental impact. Without changing industry, you're not going to survive. Just to give you a perspective, this we did in Brazil a few years ago. 33 concrete block producers, we did a CO2 footprinting of the concrete blocks products for different compressive strength of concrete blocks. But these 33 companies, they are more like 70% of the Brazilian market of concrete blocks. So the variability is huge. It's 3 times between the best and the worst producer. The same technology. Depends on cement location, materials, and so on. So how can we use one single secondary data and make a decision on that? And if you use this secondary data to make a decision on design, why the industry is going to change? Because unless the database changes too, so we need to move to from secondary to primary data, and as soon as possible. What we did in Brazil, we have a new system, the CDAC, that we develop. It's to make primary data, you need to demand less data. You cannot connect 3,000 flows for 1 year in a company to have primary data in all the supply chain. But you can do it if you put focus, for instance, what we did, CO2 and cumulative energy demand. This is what you measure. So we got like 3 orders of magnitude less data. That makes possible to make decisions. That makes possible to measure. So our system has many advantages. So we have primary data reflects mostly the companies. It's very easy to understand. There's no complicated indicator. Cheap and fast to deploy. SMEs can use. Professionals can learn. We have a rule here that's direct emissions in primary scope 1 and 2 must be primary data. You cannot outsource them. And then it's possible with CO2 energy, but not with other emissions. If you use secondary data, it's fine, you need, but then uncertainty that I think Stacy showed very clearly is wide, must be explicit. So you have an uncertainty in your report, and it makes clear that your supply chain does not control CO2. And of course, we want to do better. So this is a system that will evolve with time, increasing on scope and increasing on the life cycle. So that's what we did. It's very, very simple, very easy to understand. Why we are inventorying only CO2 and not CO2 equivalent? Because we are insisting primary data. I cannot do very easily and verify a report on methane fugitive emissions in a plant. And so we are losing that. But this is for construction. We did this for concrete in Brazil. So using EcoInvent, it's not our data, it's secondary data. GWP and CO2 footprinting, the difference is 3%. And CO2 is 75% of all GWP globally. And for construction is more than 90 in Brazil. So we focus on the priority, and we got something very easy to do, very simple to verify, accessible to SMEs and everything else. So we are losing something, yeah, but we are gaining primary data, making decisions based on primary data. CDAC is also fully digital. It's one place. We have a LCI database, a data validation audition, a digital EPD repository. Is the unique only digital repository from Brazil. IFC data exchange API, yeah, and then we have the inventory tools for the companies. So everything is in one single place. It's for free to use. Of course, if you want to issue an EPD, there is a verification cost. Second thing that we have to change, in my point of view, is information is for decision making, not for reporting. So we are trying to do here is set up a system where the primary data is used to inform designers and the people that buy stuff in construction companies in real time. So the idea is a benchmark-driven integrative design optimization. So that's what's going to work. So this is for buildings. We are focusing on structure. So conceptual design, you do a primary structural analysis. The software sends the data, quantitative data, to a benchmark API that collects the CO2 from CDAC and send back in real time to the structural designer, not only the CO2 footprint range, because there is an uncertainty. I don't know which one the company is going to supply the concrete, so I have an uncertainty, and uncertainty will be explicit, but it's going also to send the position in the ranking. So I'm the 5% best or the 5% worst. This is allow the company to redo the pre-design and optimize the design in real time. Unless we do that, just reporting after the design is complete or the construction is done, doing the calculation does not mitigate. This is just reporting. Of course, in the long time, it will help do some mitigation, but we don't have lots of time for do that. This is much, much faster. So we did a study on the CO2 footprint of embodied carbon on building structures in Brazil. We have two cumulative distribution curves. One is you use the cleaner materials from the market, and the other the dirty one. So, and you see how big is the difference between different buildings. So there's a lot of to be achieved on CO2 embodied carbon mitigation on structures. Structures probably are 70% of our embodied carbon, at least in Brazil. We also are interested on have this global open standard that Anil mentioned. So we are part in the GBDI network. We are working to have this in a global standard to allow comparisons between, for instance, the ACI design code with the CEB European FIB design codes and see what is the most efficient and how, and this allow us to learn. These are the stakeholders for CDAC. We have been support from European Union, GIC, but there's a lot of people involved from the Brazilian government and including from industrial associations. If you want to see how it works, you can have this. You have this paper describes the system. You can check it over here. Last, I would like to say that in developing world, a significant share of the construction is not done by engineers or architects. It's done with different degrees of informality. And informal settlements are probably in Brazil, 60% of the cement is sold in bags. Probably 55 is used not by non-technical people. So if you want to reduce the embodied carbon in these buildings, we have to understand. So we started this network, it's Mori network. We are trying to develop a methodology to estimate embodied carbon on our favelas and later on in middle classes. And we're also measuring the well-being. We are pretty much concerned, very much concerned about heat waves hitting these houses and how it's going to happen. This is not have a proper design, there's no ventilation and so on. So we want to understand that, and we want to imagine mitigation strategies from that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wanderlei. That's excellent three presentations providing different perspectives on this issue. Just for clarity, I think the way I use the terms primary and secondary data, perhaps better to say foreground data and background data. But really, I think the bottom line, as we heard from all our panel members, is the importance of the underlying data, the quality of that data, and I think as both Wanderlei and Stacy pointed out, any underlying uncertainty needs to be recognized. So clearly, the data ecosystem that supports our assessments is crucial. The RICS WLCA standard second edition provides an uncertainty modeling framework in which you can actually have three different aspects of uncertainty modeled in your assessments, be it the stage at which the design is taking place or the assessment is taking place. Second is the quality of the bill of materials or the quantity takeoff and other the uncertainties within the data that you're using. So that, I think, has gotten started in a very good shape here. I'm going to now start posing questions to our panel members and start the discussion there also. Our plan is to leave some time towards the end for your questions. Any comments that you would like to put, you can put these in the Q&A box directly, and we'll try and weave those questions if they connect well with our ongoing discussion. Otherwise, we'll leave time at the end to address those questions. So I'm going to first pose this big, broad question to all three panel members. In their views, what are the critical gaps in the current data ecosystem that hinder accurate whole life carbon assessments, and how can we address these gaps collaboratively? So I think let's stick to the first part of this question, big, broad brush. What are the critical gaps in the current data ecosystem that sort of cause issues when we talk about net zero emissions and resilient building. So, Stacy, do you mind getting us started, then Miranda, and then Wendell?
No problem. Yeah, and it goes back to, I think, the slide, my pyramid slide, if you can imagine that in your heads again. But I think there are various gaps. Foundationally, one of the things, if you start peeling back the layers, the bottom line is that we need accessible open emissions factors at the bottom of that pyramid to really be able to do calculations that then are comparable and consistent. And right now we rely on a couple of databases that have different emissions factors. If you look at things like the energy profiles that they provide for grids, Gabby and EcoInvent, and that's just something that we all need to acknowledge and work toward. And then I think also as you move up the chain, there is a lack of standardized generic factors for materials in different regions of the world. The work that is happening in South America and Europe and North America now, I think to address some of this is really promising, but it needs to be consistent everywhere else because a lot of the construction is going to happen in places that are not in North America, South America, or Europe over the next decades. And then I think the next level up is the lack of product-specific data and EPDs in many markets. And there's work being done. There's EPD China, EPD Egypt, and some of the places where we need to start to get to that product-specific level data that allows decision-making during design and procurement very specifically to address that need. So there's a lot of work to do, and there's different ways that each of us can play a role in filling some of those gaps. But I think acknowledging them all is the first step. And then being proactive about how we solve them is the next one.
So Miranda, over to you. What do you see as the gaps, especially coming from the data center design construction point of view, and especially MEP and IT equipment?
Yeah, well, I won't restate everything that Stacy said because I'm in 100% agreement with all of those comments. The biggest hurdle that we're trying to overcome right now is really the sharing of that information. We're having a lot of challenges with the kind of privacy of it. I think there's concerns, especially from some of the larger companies that are involved when it comes to the tech sector, that they will be publicly shamed, or that there will be press around them not doing enough, or that the information is not accurate. And in some ways, we have to try and get over that hurdle. Again, I'm not sure how we will do that, but being able to have all of that information accessible and open is really going to be critical. Like, we don't know what we don't know. And it's one of the hurdles that is causing us some issues when we're coming to this carbon disclosure label that I mentioned with the Open Compute project, is just getting the information, getting access to the information, getting companies to share what they have. And of course, everything that Stacy said too, I would echo all of that.
Okay. So Wendell, coming from the emerging markets point of view, clearly Brazil has made progress, as you just shared. But we got a question in our first version option of this webinar, which was early morning, that what do I do if my country doesn't have EPDs or other data that I use to carry assessments? What's your experience? What do you think are the gaps? I know you've tried to overcome some of those gaps, but if you could share your views on that.
I think what really needed is standardized primary data. So we need to, and then the EPD system. We are talking here, we have an emergency on global warming, and the EPD, there are 20 indicators, and there's only one to global warming, GWP, perhaps energy, I think should be part of it as well. So we have really little. In Brazil, we have, I think, 10 EPDs. Most of them are generic, meaning I have a concrete made with any kind of cement. I put an average. It means nothing in terms of decision making. It's just EPDs that are used to check the point or earn points in certification systems. It's not a tool to mitigation. So we need really primary data to do mitigation. And in order to do that, we have to focus on what is the absolute priority. That is CO2 and other global warming gases. This is, I think, we need. But we also need standardized stuff. there are a lot of data that it doesn't really describe the environmental impact. You know, the EPD system, you got the PCRs. You take a PCR from wood and take a PCR from steel and take a PCR from concrete. It doesn't add up. A few years ago, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development had a report on streamlining, or I don't know, LCA in construction, and they pointed this over there. So we need primary data, we need standardized data, comparable data to make appropriate decisions. And that's, for me, is very urgent. From Brazil, and then we have to forget data that requiring data for APD, that is data that is not possible to measure. We use secondary data, we waste money and time with information that is not really important in this moment. So I'm pretty anxious, actually. Things have been very, very hard in Brazil in terms of extreme events this year. And something has to be done in a very short time.
Neil, can I push back? Can I challenge a little bit on the EPD front? What was just stated? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
I just want to show the promise, maybe, from what we've seen happen here in North America, where, you know, EPD generation and standardization, and really for EPDs, it's within a category where you're comparing and where you're trying to decarbonize and really get the suppliers to compete against each other within something like ready-mix concrete, and that is working. We're seeing reductions of 20 to 30% plant level emissions for markets that are using EPDs in North America for that purpose. But the standardization of the PCRs within a category is happening, and that's what the EPA is doing with the Inflation Reduction Act to actually push towards specificity requirements to increase comparability within categories. So I think my distinction would be that EPDs are really there for suppliers within a category to compete against each other for procurement. And then if you expand out and you're looking at project level benchmarking and accounting, that's really where I think the generic data that allows those decisions to be made during design to happen. But we are seeing a lot of progress in that space right now of actually leveraging EPDs for getting to comparable data and actually decarbonize these sectors, because the suppliers have to disclose and compete. And the cost has gone from about $25,000 a year per plant to $1,500 a year per plant for on-demand generation of EPDs at a concrete facility based on that demand. So there is hope and promise. I want to make sure that point is there when it comes to being able to leverage some of this data.
But Stacey, how about across categories? So absolutely, I agree with what you said. Within, let's say, ready-mix concrete, PCR, there is a journey towards consistency, and the ecosystem is working. When we talk about material substitution, let's say ready-mix concrete with some other material, but for that material category, if the PCRs are weak, then that makes it different. Is that a challenge, or that's overcome now?
This is where I think it's really important. EPDs should not be used to compare materials across categories. They can be used to aggregate a very accurate assessment where you have this amount of quantity of something times its emissions factor of what you purchased, or when you're looking at procurement within a category to compare manufacturers of a like material. That generic regionalized data, whether it's country level or even within a country at a regional level, to make sure that you're getting the energy profiles right, the transportation right, it's really where that kind of open, I would call it generic, but it's just regionalized average data that needs to be harmonized lives, so you can compare across categories, because how you're looking and assessing the materials doing the LCAs for those can be consistent. So it's just these different types of data that have to be used for different purposes that need to flow together, where someone who's not an expert just is within their tool and using the right data at the right point in time.
Excellent. I think
I agree that we need secondary generic data to make a decision, but I think the generic data has to come from actual data, actual market benchmarks, not from fishing information on EcoInvent database.
No, and that's really
what is. And then the second thing is, I think we should fix the EPD system, because we need to compare wood, steel, and concrete. We need to do it for practical design decisions. This is really important. If the current EPD system doesn't add for that, we have to fix it. And
I think we will. It just won't be tomorrow.
No, but I think if you keep thinking it's not for, I only discuss things for tomorrow, we have no future. Where tomorrow is always, nothing is possible for tomorrow. We should challenge ourselves to fix EPD system. I think we should do that.
And there's work being done there. I just want to make sure people don't think they can't use the data today to at least get started.
I think we're all saying the same thing. I love
Yeah.
debate, but I think we're saying the same thing, which is there is progress being made. Obviously, more needs to be done. And then I think bringing awareness to these initiatives is crucial as well. So I'm going to ask a couple other questions related to this first question before we move on. Miranda, I wanted to see if you could share. I know you had done a case study or some kind of a best practice using SIPC TM65, how that can be utilized perhaps as a case study to do embodied carbon calculations for MEP or IT equipment for which you may not be able to find EPDs or equivalent information. Do you want to share a little bit on that work?
Absolutely. I was going to also just highlight too that this year our governing body issued a letter in July. You can find it on our website on Climate Accord, stressing the value and the importance of EPDs. This was signed by all 6 members of the governing body, meaning those 4 hyperscalers that I noted. So Meta, Google, Microsoft, AWS, Schneider Electric, and Digital Realty. And really kind of to both Stacy and Vanderlei's points, just showcasing that this data is really critical, that having it in third-party verified, accuracy or at least some level of accuracy and transparency there is crucial, and that they are looking towards this from their suppliers, from their long-term engagements in terms of how they're moving forward. So again, take a look at that letter, but this is not coming just from the panelists on this call. As we know, this is really now coming from very large purchasers of whether it's equipment or materials to really understand the long-term carbon footprint. Anyways, that noted, Anil, you mentioned that we do have a case study on SIPC TM65 material disclosure method. We actually also have a couple of other case studies out there, one coming soon on spend-based case methodology. But this is really highlighting, and what we try and do from the Climate Accord, let me be fair, is show to anyone involved or anyone reading these case studies that there are sort of pros and cons to both, that nothing is a one-size-fits-all approach to this. We are not saying this model is the end-all be-all. It's how do you look at this and review it for your own portfolio or the work that you are doing, and how does it make sense when you're integrating it to your approach? So really what it gets into, and this is coming from our equipment working group, is looking at how this calculation methodology takes into account, as Stacy said, that full kind of cycle of the life cycle of carbon emissions associated with the product, including the raw materials of it. It gets into a little bit of the basic level and mid-level calculations. So if you're looking at things like the Section A methodology form and then Section B of it, what that means in terms of actual material composition versus the final assembly in the process of it. And then it really gets into kind of step-by-step process ownership of how this works. And so there's some diagrams, some manufacturer engagement pieces, data disclosure. So it does get into when you're talking about the equipment, the size and capacity of it, the product service life, if there's refrigerants, those kinds of things, and really kind of lists out all the information that is going to be necessary if you're using this, of course, the calculation, and then ultimately what it looks like when you're getting into the reporting of it. And so we do have a product example from Schneider Electric there. It's the Galaxy VL UPS in that case study, and it shows what that looks like and how, again, benefits and or kind of setbacks from, or limitations, if you will, from that opportunity in that case study. So it's available for download off of our website, climateaccord.org.
Excellent, thank you. Stacy, I did notice on your slides, and we've been all, I think, eagerly waiting more announcements on the Open Climate Data Initiative. Could you tell us a little bit more? What gap does it fill? What exactly is being done? I know a little bit that these would be generic products, components, systems for which embodied carbon calculations can be seen. But could you give us a little bit more detail on OCDI?
Sure. Yeah. So it really started with us hearing a lot of feedback from users of EC3 and Tally LCA that there were frustrations around the lack of data in certain regions. So if they were in Africa or Asia or South America trying to use EC3, they were having to use factors from EPDs that were coming from North America or Europe. And in Tally LCA, we're a North American data set currently, and there were folks that wanted to use that tool for whole building lifecycle assessment in other markets. So we saw a need to fill gaps in basically a very, I think, full and robust data set for all major construction materials used in buildings infrastructure that would be harmonized in a way that could be then used to create building level life cycle assessments, whole life carbon assessments that could be compared across regions and be complete. Ramble reached out to us with a similar idea and need as a LCA provider. We got WAP, also an LCA provider in North America, also on board. And Loudest Foundation saw that the use case for this and were our first funders, then Meta and ClimateWorks both came on. And so the first step was to create a harmonized methodology for how we would generate these data sets. There's research that happens to make sure we're going regionally enough, whether it's, at a country level or even, again, within a country, a regional level based on differences in energy profiles and things at different production facilities. Land on a data set, again, for the underlying data so that was consistent. Publish that methodology and then test the production of the LCAs with Ramble and WAP during that work. Eco Platform comes in really as a verification layer, where the idea is that if we publish the methodology in this first data set generated by 2 practitioners, that then other practitioners could opt in and basically check data sets in if they follow the methodology. All of that would then be verified, similar to how an EPD is verified by a group of verifiers from Eco Platform that would say, yes, you met the same standards, you use the same methods, this is comparable and harmonized, and that new data set could be checked into the platform. And then it will be provided in both we're calling it open impact format, very similar to Open EPD, where the data can be pulled through the API into any other tool to allow comparability between tools, as well as the ILCD plus EPD format if people are using that database for factors. So we're testing the first 300 materials right now for publishing.
Thank you very much, Stacy, for that. Before I jump on to our next question, I'm going to weave in a question that's in our Q&A, which says, pushing for internationally harmonized LCA data can put a high burden on developing country if this is based on current EPD standards with over 20 indicators, which makes it mandatory to use EcoInvent or another such LCA database. Is there any alternative on agreeing on a simpler basic LCA scope? Is this being discussed? Open to anyone from the panel to maybe briefly respond to that.
Where we started, GWP is the baseline factor that's mandatory, even in that ODCI project. But as we started modeling the other indicators for meeting Tracy methods were things that could be added on pretty simply. So for that data set, we are doing more, but I think even in EC3, GWP, as Vanderlei mentioned, is the one that we urgently need to be addressing. So I think, at least in our work, that's the one that we start with. I'd love to hear Vanderlei's thoughts on that too.
I really think that simplifying the process is the only way to go. We have to reduce the use of the fishing data. I'm going to EcoInvent and I fish the best data to my client. People do that. People really do that, to believe me. And people that do that, they are, not helping. So we have to go to primary data. In order to go primary data, we have to simplify. And if you want to have it in developing world, you need to be even simpler than the Americans or the Europeans can afford. And that's the reason we decided just for CO2. It's very polemic in Brazil. We are being hit hard for that. But nowadays, people are making decisions based on cost. And now we are introducing cost and CO2. I think it's up. It's a step on the right direction, and it's 70–80% of our problem. So we have to be bold, and I really think the GlobalABC and what you are doing is tremendous. But we should, I think EPDs here should be used, must be used, but we should aim for the solution and the point that we have to be simple, more inclusive. You know, how can we imagine a small and medium enterprise doing EPD in Brazil costs $15,000 each EPD. I have 30 products in my plan. That's going to, so that's really a problem. I really would like to see more this vision, more inclusive vision in terms of CO2, and at the same time more based on the real data. This, for me, it's very clear. It's the only way to go.
Excellent, thank you. So I did an interesting request. I'm part of a group of folks interested in EPDs. Somebody has built an AI tool that can scrape EPDs and get useful information into perhaps an open EPD kind of a interoperable format. So I asked them this question: just run a test and see on the EPDs that they have scraped. I think it's like, maybe I'm giving approximate numbers, 150,000 EPDs. Out of those 150,000 EPDs, I think only about 10,000 have values for anything beyond A1, A2, and A3. So maybe if you look at that, perhaps the number of EPDs with module, even module C would be quite limited. So I think that dimension of EPDs perhaps need to be expanded also. I know things are happening, but there's some more room to explore and do some work. So let me move on to the next question, which talks about the value and importance of quality data. We've just sort of been discussing the availability of data, but it's many people remind us when we talk about data that it's also the quality of data that's important to consider. So I'd ask each panel member to briefly reflect on the quality of data available to us today to conduct assessments. Wanderley, do you want to start? Then
no, I can tell a story that is really funny. We have been in a master jury, and my students, she just copied a table of emissions from EPD from a Brazilian company. We have very few. It was for cement. And then a colleague, Fernanda, noticed that there are 5,000 kilograms of water for ton of cement. That it's completely impossible, you know, even because there is no big supply chain behind it, no water in the process, and so on. And then I phoned the guy from the company. The EPD was in the market for 2 years. He never, ever, the owner, the guy that contracted the EPD, never he didn't notice this 5,000. He was looking to GWP all the time. So when I talk about quality in engineering, it's I have a good data, and I know their uncertainty. So, and we're playing games with Monte Carlo sampling to describe variability. We assume the standard deviation of 5%, coefficient of variation of 5%. We're finding 300% variation in Brazilian market for cement-based materials, and maybe less 200 for steel rebars in the country, in Brazil, in the same company, in different plants. So nothing like that you find in these databases. So quality for me is primary data. And if I have generic data, I have to put the uncertainty. And this generic data and their uncertainty comes from a representative sample from the market. Then I can make an informed decision in the design phase. What I use a lot Stacy's data, because it's really handy, you know, it's there, it's the best we have in the world. but we should aim better.
I agree 100% with you. We're trying to get to the better data. The one thing I want to pick up on is that point that you made around the range and having the range exposed even in generic data. And in that ODCI data set, we are doing that, and we're using representative data from the models to be able to show people a high, low, and a mid versus just a mid, because that's super important. Unless you know the range is there, you can't make an informed choice or try to figure out how to get to the lower end of that range. So
Exactly.
I want to just second that point. And on the EPD side, the specificity of the data is so important. And that's really where the guidelines that are coming out of North America now that layer on top of the product category rules, because PCRs are not specific enough in how they address this yet, is very important. My favorite example of this is if you think about a concrete supplier in the States, if they follow the product category rule right now, if they're importing cement from somewhere else, like China or another global market, they are allowed to use the North American industry average for that cement emissions factor. So if they know that the cement emissions are higher than that for something that they are supplying and procuring and putting into their EPD right now, they can choose to use the lower average number and misrepresent their ready mix emissions, and that's allowed. So that is one of the things that we actually showed to the federal government here in the States to help them push towards this specificity requirement where you must have cement-specific emissions factors through EPDs for those cement plants that follow those consistent rules for EPA-compliant EPDs over the next handful of years. So we have to continue to push for the specificity, and that disclosure then allows you to reduce the uncertainty. Until that's possible, there better be an uncertainty factor around that number at that ready mix plant if they can choose to use that cement factor that's not accurate. So I'll stop there and get off my pedestal, but it's we see it happening now, and we've got to address it.
Stacey keeps staying on the pedestal. I couldn't agree with you more. We have to push it. I mean, to Vanderlei's point, like, yes, this does cost. We do have big purchasers, though, that can help. I know that, in my previous role at Meta, we had a supplier engagement program. We were very teed up to supporting wherever you were in terms of your size and scale of the products coming out. What is the EPDs, the LCAs? I mean, really trying to support and move this needle forward on all levers. And it really becomes this kind of collaborative effort to get the data. I love the point, though, too, about noting when there are inaccuracies or, again, just various levels of the range there, too. That kind of clarity and honesty to the market, I think, also helps drive it. You know that this isn't 100%, or, again, where it falls in that range. That just, again, provides that lens of detail that I think is just critical, again, wherever you are in terms of your reporting, so that there's that kind of lens on it and not just this is the end all be all. So
thank you very much. So moving on to the next question. Really, I think data availability is one aspect, and this came up in our earlier webinar as well. I think the issue of skills and competencies, bringing not only folks who are currently practicing or would like to begin practicing this area, and obviously new entrants into the profession. What can be done to support the data ecosystem in terms of skills and competencies? Are there any major global initiatives that you're aware of, and what more can be done? So maybe we'll start with you, Miranda, then over to Vanderlei, and then Stacey.
Yeah, I mean, I just mentioned one, again, depending on where you are in the supply chain, who you're involved with. I was mentioning Meta's supplier data program, or supplier data engagement program. That really helps and moves the needle in terms of that kind of effort from the buyer side of the work and how to do this. I mean, obviously, Anil, all the programs that you all have when it comes to some of the trainings, that is something to get engaged and get involved with. I think Stacey and Vanderlei are going to have better answers on this one. Unfortunately, I'm sort of a little bit removed on what's going on in terms of the trainings and moving the needle when it comes to that kind of work. So maybe loop back to me as they talk, and I'll think through some more.
Sure, Vanderlei.
Okay, I'm the guy of simple things, but I really believe that LCA became a very, very complex topic. It's if I'm trying to do a universal tool to assess all environmental impacts for any product, it's going to be very, very complex. And it's a lot of people got scared about LCA. That you need to hire a consultant, you have an expert. I'm trying to teach. If I try to teach LCA, I've tried that to undergrads, they will get horrified because there are things that are very difficult, very esoteric. It's for, a small club, my friends. So we transform it into simple things, CO2, water, waste, trying to keep the concept. And then you demolish the barriers, just arithmetics. It's just arithmetics. So I really think we should teach LCA, simplified LCA undergrad. The government has to mandate LCA simplified to everyone because it's possible. The big companies like Miranda mentioned, they have to teach their supply chain on that and demand from that, because then people will learn. Because if there is no need, people is not going to learn. There's a huge barrier. So my point of view, I think education is paramount here. What we try to do in Brazil is reduce the amount of knowledge that is needed to get into the game of reducing CO2 footprint of a construction process or a construction product production. And then back again to the simplification. But I think education is really, really important.
Stacy?
Yeah, I mean, I'll pick up on the government role. I mean, I know with the EPA grant program that the American Center for Life Cycle Assessment and the Carbon Leadership Forum combined, I think, got over $10 million of grant funding for a lot of it for education and how to standardize education and bring along more practitioners. So that's I think, luckily we have funding actually in the U.S. to support some of these initiatives from the nonprofits that could and should be out there helping people learn and get accredited and actually build the bench of everyone that can do this work. I think Vanderlei should talk to Kate Simonen about the simplification approach as part of their grant to see if we can get some of that thinking into how we approach it here in the States. And then on the other side, I think what the hyperscalers and some of these large companies in terms of educating their suppliers, we've seen that starting to happen. Education on how to get an EPD funding to help support that process. And I think alignment on the ask so that a supplier knows that if they do this one time and learn this one way, they're not going to have to do it again and again and again slightly differently for each purchaser. So that I think aligned ask we're starting to see from the Thai-Mason Accord and others, I think is super important to take some of the pressure off of the suppliers to know I have to learn this one method one time and then it's going to be used over and over again. So that's super important, I think, on the supplier side.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I think we are quite close to our end time here. What I'd like to do is give you a chance to do a brief closing statement, and the thread we can weave in that closing statement, each one of you could be any global initiatives or other strategies at the global scale that can help push this idea of a data ecosystem for NZERB. And I can get started. I'll just like to highlight the important work that is happening at GlobalABC through the Buildings Breakthrough Agenda, especially B1 standards and certification, which sort of also includes information about data, and then B5, which is capacity building. B1 is being led by World GBC, and we are providing as supporting partners some basic support to that as well. And I think ICC is leading the capacity building priority action, and that's also crucial. Similarly, I think the WBCSD's market transformation action agenda, in which there are various 3 levers and various interventions that are bringing especially the private sector innovation into this space. And we are, as RICS, involved in the WLCA aspects of those levers and interventions. And obviously, there is, Stacy, as you are involved, there is that data initiative also, or intervention within the MTAA. So I'll pass it on to you, Stacy, a very quick closing statement, and then maybe Miranda, then Vanderlei, and then within 4 minutes, we wrap this up, plus pass it back to Mona for closing remarks. But before I do that, I want to thank each one of you for taking the time, and our participants, and Mona for making this happen.
Yes, I think mine is just a call to action to not be duplicative. There's so much work to do. I think building transparency is trying to sit in this place where we can provide this data for the public good and NGO, and we are going to constantly improve and do more of that. And you can trust that that's really our mission. It's data that everyone should have access to, so no one else has to do that digitization work themselves. But I think in terms of the upstream data, we need an open data set of emissions factors that are consistent and global. To Vanderlei's point, we need to standardize some global product category rules. There's work to do in all these different places. So please find your lane of where you can really help us fill all these gaps that we have. There's enough work for all of us to do. Let's just not repeat each other's work.
Vanderlei, quick closing.
Yeah, so I think I would like to see perhaps a shift from APD to carbon declaration worldwide to make it possible for small and medium enterprises, to make it easy for people to understand and make it feasible in developing countries. Developing countries are going to be the core of CO2 emissions from construction in the next 50 years. If you insist in EPD, we're going to be lost. Maybe we should discuss that, Anil, and in the GlobalABC. I would love to be part of it. And also, I think we should talk about like a global initiative on education, not for the EPD, but for carbon reporting or something like that. Again, to make it possible to scale it up. I insist, without primary data, without small and medium enterprises, all the companies providing their own data, there is no future for us. There's no point of trying to save EPDs. We have to save the planet first.
Miranda, over to you.
Plus one to everything that was said. Also understand that this takes some investment. And I don't just mean that monetarily. It takes time and effort. It takes manpower. It takes, all of us to be doing this together. So, please invest what you can. Again, learn about these products, learn about how to train for them, understand and read whether, again, it is an EPD, an LCA, any of this information. So just get yourself familiar with it. We all have that responsibility. As Vanderlei said, it's not just any of us in the sustainability space. It's really collectively how we're going to move and drive this needle forward.
Mona, over to you.
Thanks so much, Anil. I don't know if you can hear me okay. Yeah, great. This is definitely a very interesting webinar. I especially appreciated a lot of the back and forth. Is really, in my mind, what an ideal webinar sounds like. It's a panel, right? You bring people that are experts in their fields with different point of views, so they would interact with each other. And so that was really refreshing to see. So thank you for sharing your experiences, for sharing your points of view, even when that meant you would disagree with each other on the panel. I truly appreciate that, because that is indeed what we look for. So thank you for sure. And then Vanderlei, I was listening to you and your closing statements when you said you'd like the GlobalABC to shift focus a little bit more. We're happy for you to join, and let's have these conversations together and find a way forward. And you're right, at the end of the day, we are fighting to save the earth, the planet from climate change, and pollution and nature and saving nature. So whichever way we end up doing that, let us indeed join forces and do that. So thank you. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Thanks Anil for putting this together. And thank you Stacy, Vanderlei, and Miranda for your time today. And thanks to all the participants who stayed with us later here in Central Europe, but perhaps a bit earlier depending on where you are in the world. And we truly appreciate your time, and we look forward to continuing these conversations.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye, Anil. Bye, Mona. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.